I don't think we humans realize how much we are creating those environments with those 35,000 decisions that we make every day.
You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and this is episode 62. In this episode, I welcome Madelaine Weiss. Madelaine received her Master's of Social Work from Simmons University, her MBA from Boston University, and completed clinical internships at Harvard. She is a mindset expert and board-certified executive career and life coach, as well as the author of Getting to Great, a 5-step strategy for work and life based on science and stories. She has been featured on multiple media outlets, including NBC and Fox TV, and today she is here to chat with us about decisions. Now, I do want to mention that at one point, Madelaine demonstrates a model of the brain using her hands. So if you're not familiar with this model, please check out the corresponding YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes below. Madelaine, welcome to the show.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
I am so excited that you agreed to be a guest on the Happy Doc Student Podcast because your mission is to help people live happier, healthy, and more productive lives. So you're such a great fit. And I was hoping we could start by you just sharing your story and how it was you got on this path to help people understand things that they can do to better their lives and really experience their best self.
You know, I started out in a clinical chemistry laboratory, and I then went on to work at the USDA Biological Control Lab and the Drexel University Cardiac Catheter Lab, but there was always a tug to working more directly to the people. I morphed away from bacteriology and other kinds of human products to doing the kind of work that I do now. As you and I were discussing, my father passed away when I was 15 years old, and I was really concerned about my mother, and I wanted to help. So at 15 years old, I was beating the streets trying to get a job. I was in Pennsylvania and didn't realize that there were laws against hiring me and could not understand. And this is another example of what goes on in the mind. And if no one's accessing what goes on in the mind, we make up these incredibly incorrect and not helpful stories. And I couldn't figure out why nobody was hiring me. And I wanted desperately to work. So I have a whole different take on work. It's really I get to work for me because I'm in a place now where I feel really aligned. I think most people who come to me to work with me want that kind of alignment. And sort of that feeling that you're doing what you were put here to do. Mm-hmm. And I have that and like to share it.
So much of the audience is in their doctoral program because they believe their life purpose is going to be fulfilled through getting this degree. And I love the perspective you have. Words are so powerful that you get to do this.
Right.
Versus you have to or you need to.
And if you live long enough, you also get to pivot whenever you like. I think I'm the pivot queen. If you look, and of course I've been here for a long time, but if you look at my bio, it's just been one thing after another thing after another thing, sort of following some inner voice. And I teach mindfulness and believe that the quieter we get inside, the more we can even hear that voice, because most of the time there's so much noise in there, it's drowned out by that. The book that I wrote about how to get from where we are to this feeling of really having a great life.
Before we started recording, we talked about, here we are in January, It's a month where people are thinking about where they are and where they'd want to go. And we talked about maybe dispelling some myths of decision making, which is something that you talk about in your book. And we'll have links in the show notes to the book, and you can tell people your website and how to find it. But let's start with, here we are in January. What do you want to say about New Year's resolutions and how to make decisions?
Okay, so on my website, there's a blog tab. And if people go in there and in the search bar, they put decisions, you'll see that I've already written the number of posts on decision making last year and this year on New Year's resolutions. But after I wrote the book on this 5-step process of getting to great, I became so fascinated with decision making as the whole foundation of that. And how do we make these decisions? I don't think I mentioned, and I don't think I publicized it anywhere. Oh, actually, it is in the book. A number of years back, I was accepted to Harvard for a PhD in psychology and social relations, which is what they called the program then. And I turned them down. And when I think throughout my life, what was the craziest decision I ever made? I'm pretty sure it was that. So I'm just fascinated by the way in which a single decision can shape our lives. And I'm going to get into the myths in a minute. But I also want to say that I think it's not even only the decisions we make, but what we make of the decisions once we have made them that really makes or breaks our lives. So I think after I did that, I realized that I might have messed up a little bit. And I took all of my clinical training through Harvard sort of to make it up to myself. And I feel like I have a really strong educational background now. Okay. So one of the myths in decision making, and there's this thing called Buridan's ass. Did you ever hear of that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've seen it two different ways. There's a donkey and there's a bale of hay over here and a bale of hay over there, or there's a pail of water here and a bale of hay here. And the donkey can't decide which one, and it starves to death or dies of thirst or whatever because it's there deciding. And meanwhile, if it's in business, the competition is delighted that you're sitting there trying to come up with the perfect information for the best decision you can possibly come up with. And what the research is suggesting is that the reason decisions are hard is because the threats and opportunities on either side are approximately equal. So the harder it is, they're saying the less time you should spend on it.
Interesting.
How counterintuitive is that?
That's fascinating.
Then there's other research about if you hesitate, like if you're in a leadership position and you hesitate, people won't follow you. And these are generalities, and I'm sure there are exceptions. But when a leader has an important decision and is trying to be so thoughtful, there's actually a downside to that. There's also research that when in doubt, go big and bold. They followed people along in one of these research studies, and I have the links if anybody would like to know them. And I think they're in the blog posts also. So the people who went bigger and bolder and took more risks down the line were happier than the people who secured their status quo and their safety. Another point that I would like to make is that another myth is that decisions are not supposed to be emotional. And that's also a myth, because what they find is that when the emotion centers in the brain are impaired, judgment is impaired, and decision-making is also impaired. So, and this is something we can do right here, right now. the hand model of the brain. This is Dan Siegel's model. So what you want is an integrated brain. So for sure, you don't want the emotional center in the middle of the brain to be driving the bus, but you also need the data from that. So if you can calm this part just enough, and I have a 30-second mindset reset for that, if you calm that just enough, the frontal cortex is in communication. You have an integrated brain, and that's where you want to make your decisions from. Not just from here without data from here, and not just from here without reason from here, but a whole integrated, strong brain. So there was a study about a doctor who had the emotional centers of his brain impaired, and he couldn't get dressed in the morning because he'd look at all his pants and he didn't know which ones he felt like putting on. So he'd just stand there because he didn't have that kind of data guiding him in his decision making. There's all kinds of research on that too, and that's also in the blog posts.
And again, I'll have all those links. But
Yep.
Let's talk about this idea. There's so many decisions that we make day to day, but especially if you're in a doctoral program, from what class am I going to take next to when am I going to work on my research? And I'm fascinated by this idea that if basically the pro-con lists for decision A and decision B are similar, that's when you're getting really confused. And that's where people are hesitating, maybe paralyzed by confusion even.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said confused, and I was thinking just really stuck. We make, so they say, 35,000 decisions a day. Right there, that blows my head off. And they say that more than 200 of them are about food, which I think is low. I think it's more about food. But it's just like the example of the doctor who couldn't get dressed in the morning. It starts there, and it's all day long, every day. And the more we belabor it, I think the more we drain our energy that we then don't have for whatever it is we decided to implement at all.
So you've got a decision to make, and do you have tips on getting unstuck?
Yes, I do. I think you put your higher brain in charge. So for myself, and I think I'm pretty good at decision making, except for that one I told you about. So I feel like I have this stew, and I will ask your opinion perhaps, and maybe that person, and it all goes into my stew. And then because I think I'm relatively quiet in there now for a human being, it comes to me. And I know that nothing is carved in stone. Again, I've pivoted all over the place throughout my life, that it's what we make of the decisions once we have made them that maybe I'll go out on a limb and say is most important of all. So you gather your data, you make your decision, and you know that there is no perfect information, and you make sure that you're taking very good care of your brain. You know, people take care of their cars and their teeth and their plants and their pets. And how much time do we spend caring for, cultivating, tending, disciplining our very own mind, which is a big part of the book.
It's key, especially if you're in a high-level academic program. And I've had a number of episodes, people come on and share different techniques. But what do you say we do your 30-second technique? Maybe people are thinking about some decisions that they need to make.
I want to suggest that people do it regularly as a matter of a way of life, not just when you're like so panicked and you don't know what to do, which I think it's good for also. But also on the website, there's a pull down that has a complimentary mind management exercises feature. And there's a breathing room on there, which is a one-page, very simple meditation exercise. And the one we're going to do now, the power breathing, is also on there. It's really diaphragmatic breathing or polyvagal breathing, but I call it power breathing. I had a client that I did it with. Well, I do it with all my clients, but when I did it with this client, he had a very, very racing mind, very bright, wonderful young man. And when he was finished in 30 seconds, he just went, wow. It was like a psychedelic drug because it's so centering. So let's all do that. Ready?
Yeah. And do you want to explain diaphragmatic? That might be a new word for some of the listeners.
Okay. So what's key and different about the regular breathing that we tend to do is that it's belly out on the in-breath, belly in on the out-breath. So usually we fill our lungs. And if you did that, I would see your shoulders going up and down. In this particular case, we fill our bellies with air. What that does is it stimulates the polyvagal nerve, which you probably know about, which runs like from the abdominal area all the way up to the brain. And it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming release, and takes us out of fight, flight, freeze of the sympathetic nervous system. So that might have sounded like a bunch of gobbledygook to everyone, but the point is it kicks whatever it is upstairs to the executive brain. It brings that back online, which is exactly what we want. We want the executive brain back online, and we want the whole thing talking to each other, integrated in the healthiest, I'm going to say happiest way.
So we can be productive.
So you can be whatever you want. So you can have the life you want. Absolutely. So feet flat on the ground, top of the head parallel with the sky. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. And you're going to take 3 luxurious breaths in through the nose and out through the nose. Belly out on the in-breath, belly in on the out-breath. And when you're finished, come back into the room.
I love that you use the word luxurious. I've never heard that with breathing, and it's so telling. Instead of a full deep breath of treating myself, that's how I felt. Like I was treating myself to this pause so that I could calm my busy mind. I know my listeners, they tell me that is one of their number one challenges, is kind of getting that hamster to slow down the wheel so that they can get perspective.
Sometimes people worry that they'll get, what's the word, sluggish or something. Like when you say slow down, I could hear some people thinking, I don't want to slow down. I can't slow down. I have some, but what it does is it just makes you smarter. So you're using less of your time and energy, and you have more of your time and energy available for more things that you need to do because you're not draining it. So it's just clearer, smarter, sharper, quicker, I think. You know how they say you're supposed to express your gratitudes every day? I am so grateful for my mind, for the clarity of it. You know, I know if I live long enough, it's not always going to be that way, but I've lived long enough that I just really appreciate the clarity. These exercises are just, they don't cost anything. They don't take a lot of time. They're just so nourishing. And that's where I get the luxurious.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if people resist because it is so simple. But if you were listening along and you did your 3 deep breaths, luxurious breaths, you're sitting here now listening to this podcast with the ability to access that higher level thinking. So it is making you smarter.
It is. It is.
And I really want to drive home the point you made. You said, hey, this is going to work when you're under stress, but to really reap the benefits, make it a habit.
Yes.
And do you have any techniques that you suggest to help people remember to breathe? Sometimes I find myself, I'm like, when was the last time I took a nice deep breath? I almost have to remind myself.
I'm going to tell you what they say, and then I'm going to tell you what they said after what they say. They say it takes 21 days to make a habit, and then I heard it takes 60 days to make a habit. But I think either way you cut that, if you force it at the beginning, it will become a habit. It's like planting a new garden. So when I'm into conversations about creating new habits, I pretty much tell people just don't water the old garden. Do not spend your time and energy trying to change a bad habit. I mean, unless it's death defying or something, I don't know. But otherwise, just like we have these two gardens, the old one, and then we plant this new garden, create something new, tend it, water it, enjoy it, and just ignore the old garden. What's that fable about the little boy asks his grandfather? He says there are these two wolves, and one of them is the good wolf and one of them is the bad wolf. And he says to his grandfather, which one is going to win? And the grandfather said, the one you feed.
Yes.
It's the same thing. So how you can create a new habit is just do it and do it and do it till it becomes so natural in your life that you would miss it if you didn't. When I'm talking with people about meditation, I always say anybody who is not meditating doesn't particularly feel like they have a place, a time and a place in their life for it. So what you have to do is make that place until it becomes a part of your life. And then it takes no energy at all to do it.
Because you actually crave it. At least that's been my experience.
Yes.
It becomes like brushing your teeth. I like brushing my teeth in the morning. I like that feeling. It's the same thing. My morning meditation, I look forward to it. I can't imagine not doing it. And I'm not sitting there for an hour cross-legged in a lotus pose. I'm doing something very simple.
Yep.
Usually takes 10 to 20 minutes,
Yep.
but it absolutely changes the course of my day.
You know, I've been studying, I think I mentioned this to you, Advaita Vedanta, pre-Hindu tradition for over 20 years. And meditation is the essence of what the tutoring is all about. And I hear people say things like what you just said. Personally, I don't notice the immediate impact. What I notice is that over these 20 years, I have become a finer, smarter person. And that's good enough for me. I do not notice anything if I do it or don't do it, but I like the evolution of me and my life since I started meditating. Now, maybe it's that, maybe it's not that, I don't know, but I'm a fan. I was in a fire drill when I was working at Harvard Medical School, and I was out in the quad. And the dean of the medical school came up to me because I had just gotten into this sort of thing. And I had a mindfulness book under my arm. And he said, I'm a fan, you know. And I said, actually, I didn't know, but thank you for telling me that. He said, yeah, I'm a neurologist, and I am 100% certain that meditation alters the structure of the brain. And Sarah Lazar, I think, is at Mass General, is doing some really good work on things like that, about the thickening of a certain layer of the brain. So it's not that you don't know how you feel, you're just not overwhelmed by how you feel. So it's more like the data that it should be. So when I was working at Harvard Medical School, I was teaching the first year medical class at the beginning and the end of their anatomy course. how to fall still in this way that helps them stay in touch with their humanity without being overwhelmed by it, which is, I'm sure, a worthy goal.
Is falling still a type of meditation?
Mm-hmm. When I used to speak to the class, I'd see them in the hallways running around. And then we'd get together in this forum and I would ask them to fall still and I'd look at the transformation of their faces, the peace and tranquility that you can have, just like that.
Just with the suggestion, fall still.
Yeah. I couldn't believe the first time I did it, I couldn't believe they actually did it just because I said so. It's like, what is this? But they did, and it was the most beautiful thing.
Probably because the human body is seeking that homeostasis that you get when you're just still. So It was probably something that they didn't know to do, but when you said it, it sounded really good.
Yeah, right. Right.
You were talking about being a big fan of meditation, as am I. I've had a number of guests talk about that. We're recording this in January. We know that New Year's resolutions don't have a great execution rate, but there's probably a lot of people listening right now thinking, I should really do that. I should take more time to calm my mind. What advice would you give them? How could they follow through on this decision?
Well, I think basically what you and I were already talking about, just do it. There's this wonderful study out of Yale. I really love this study. It said that when nothing is changing, you're in your comfort zone because the brain thinks everything is fine. If you do something different, the brain goes, whoa, something's happening here, and the learning centers turn on. So at the beginning of something new, it's going to be uncomfortable. And all I can say is if you keep at it for whether it's 21 or 60 days, I don't know. But if you keep at it, as you were saying, and again, I have one sheets on my website that just make it, and it's in the book too, just make it really easy. It doesn't, you said yours is really simple. You do it either for your 10 minutes or your 20 minutes, whatever works for you, and everyone can figure that out for themselves.
Even though I am going to link your website in the show notes, do you want to tell people what it is?
Sure. It's MadelaineWeiss.com.
Okay. And your book, now I know you were showing it. So for those of you watching this on YouTube, you got to see it. But for those listening, would you tell us a little bit more about your book?
Yeah. So I got pretty interested at some point that my clients were doing really, really well. And they were all very different, one from the other, in age, ethnicity, occupation, and so on. I thought, okay, what's happening? And also my training is so diverse. I went to business school and I'm a classically trained psychotherapist. And then I morphed into coaching and became a board certified coach. And then there's the philosophy. So I was thinking, what is actually happening here? And you can imagine my delight when I noticed it could break down into the word G.R.E.A.T. because I just thought that was great. So it's this 5-step process, which is actually an internal and external environmental reboot. Like Darwin knew the world belonged to those who best adapted to their environments or who were fit to be best adapted to their environments. And I don't think we humans realize how much we are creating those environments with those 35,000 decisions that we make every day. The first line of the book is a great life depends on a great fit between who we are and the environments in which we live. And then it takes it from there. There's usually a quirky anecdote about my life at the beginning of each chapter that's pertinent to the topic, whether it's about money or time or play. And then there's a case study and an exercise at the end of each of these chapters.
What's the title?
Getting to Great, a 5-step strategy for work and life based on science and stories. You can tell I like studies. I love studies.
Yes, the science part is important, but the stories are usually what get me as a reader. So, as we're wrapping up this episode, do you have a favorite quote or words of wisdom you want to share with the audience?
I do. It's a favorite concept, and it is the concept that I came upon through my studies of philosophy. And the concept is good company, which does include the quality of the company that we choose. And I want to put a line under that. Again, we are all creating the world that we are living in. So we should all be creating a world we want to live in. And good company is the people, but also the books we read, the food we eat, the music we listen to, and now hear this, the thoughts in our head, the quality of the thoughts in our head. Good company. I think if a lot of people pay attention to what's going on in there, it's not such good company sometimes. So,
And the first time someone shared that with me, I had conflicting emotions. I felt at one time completely overwhelmed. These are my thoughts and I can control them, but at the same time, incredibly empowered, because then I thought, wait, these are my thoughts. I can control them.
yeah. I love the way you said that, the two different ways. Yes.
So
Yes,
it's keeping
true.
good company. Here we are starting a new year. Think beyond just your network, but what you're surrounding yourself, your body, and what's going on inside your body from what you're eating and drinking and thinking. And then you can really use that solid foundation to create the life that you were meant to live.
And anything new that you're doing, which the forces work against, if you say, I get to, instead of I have to, that usually makes a really big difference. I had a couple I was working with. The husband started saying, I get to feed the children. And he realized what a privilege that was. And it didn't feel like that before he framed it.
It shifts the energy.
Yeah.
Next time you're logging in or walking to your class or working on your research, instead of saying, I have to do this or I need to do this, just do an experiment with yourself and say, I get to, and experience that change.
Yeah. Because actually, there are a lot of people who don't get to whatever it is.
That's right.
We take a whole lot for granted.
Well, thank you for sharing your decades of wisdom and experience with the listeners. It was such a pleasure to chat with you today.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, here's to more joy in your journey. The Happy Doc Student Podcast is brought to you by expandyourhappy.com, and you can learn more there. Oh, and hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.